Get your bag and move to the back. You don't belong here.
The words sliced through the cabin air like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Flight attendant Brenda Miller didn't whisper them. She didn't hesitate. She delivered them with the kind of authority that comes from 20 years of deciding who deserves respect and who doesn't. Her voice carried across the first-class cabin of Skyline Airways Flight 492, ensuring every passenger could hear exactly what she thought about the man in the faded gray hoodie sitting in Seat 1A. What Brenda didn't know was that in exactly 5 minutes and 37 seconds, one phone call from that same man would freeze $700 million in assets, crash a stock price by 73%, and end her career along with dozens of others. She was about to learn the most expensive lesson in aviation history: never judge a person by the clothes they're wearing, because you never know if they're the one signing your paycheck. Before we dive into this incredible true story of power prejudice and poetic justice, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever been underestimated because of how you looked, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this story is about to show you that quiet dignity can move mountains and change entire companies in minutes. The rain hammered against the reinforced windows of Gate B-14 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport like an angry drum solo that refused to end. It was 6:47 p.m. on a cold Thursday evening in November, and the first-class lounge buzzed with the kind of quiet energy that only comes from people who have somewhere important to be. The air smelled of expensive espresso Italian leather and what could only be described as liquid entitlement. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany tables where business titans closed million-dollar deals between sips of aged scotch. But Marcus Sterling wasn't interested in the amenities. He sat alone in the corner booth, furthest from the crowd, his hood pulled up over a pair of noise-canceling headphones, fingers moving across the cracked screen of his iPhone 12 with the focused intensity of a surgeon. To anyone watching, Marcus looked like he'd wandered into the wrong building. Maybe a college student trying to stretch his meal plan, or perhaps an aspiring musician who'd gotten lucky with an upgrade. He wore gray Champion sweatpants that had seen better days, a plain black Hanes hoodie that was soft from too many wash cycles, and a pair of white Air Force 1S that were clean but clearly not fresh out of the box. There was no Patek Philippe on his wrist, no Louis Vuitton luggage at his feet, no Platinum American Express card casually displayed on the table. Just a weathered leather messenger bag that looked like it had survived a war, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from 72 straight hours of high-stakes negotiations. But appearances, as the entire staff of Skyline Airways was about to discover in the most painful way possible, can be catastrophically deceiving. Marcus Sterling wasn't a student stretching his budget. He wasn't an aspiring artist hoping for his big break. He was the founder and chief executive officer of Sterling Dynamics, a private equity and logistics empire that had quietly become the invisible backbone of American transportation infrastructure. His company controlled shipping routes, managed supply chains, and held strategic debt positions in companies most people had never heard of but used every single day of their lives. Marcus was worth approximately $15.7 billion, making him the 43rd richest person in North America. But you'd never know it from looking at him, and that was exactly how he preferred it. While other billionaires competed to see who could build the biggest yacht or buy the most expensive art, Marcus had spent the last 2 decades perfecting the art of invisible influence. He moved through the world like a ghost, accumulating power while everyone else was distracted by the noise. The last 72 hours had been particularly brutal even by Marcus's standards. He'd been locked in a windowless conference room on the 37th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, orchestrating the hostile takeover of Meridian Global Shipping, a failing conglomerate that controlled critical Pacific trade routes. The negotiations had been vicious, involving lawyers from 7 different countries, regulatory officials who seemed determined to make everything as complicated as possible, and board members who would rather burn their company to the ground than sell it to someone they considered an outsider. Marcus had won, of course. He always won. But the victory had come at a cost. He hadn't slept in 3 days. He'd survived on nothing but black coffee, protein bars, and the kind of pure determination that had built his empire from a single delivery truck he'd bought with a borrowed $5,000 when he was 22 years old. His head felt like it was wrapped in cotton. His eyes burned from staring at documents, and every muscle in his body ached from spending 3 straight days hunched over conference tables. All Marcus wanted was to collapse into seat 1A of Flight 492, close his eyes, and wake up 8 hours later in London, where his assistant Sarah would meet him with a proper breakfast and a detailed briefing on the 17 other deals currently moving through Sterling Dynamics' acquisition pipeline. He didn't want to make conversation. He didn't want to network. He certainly didn't want to explain to anyone why a man who looked like he'd just finished a shift at Best Buy was sitting in first class. He just wanted to be left alone. Flight 492 to London Heathrow is now beginning pre-boarding for passengers needing special assistance, followed by first class and business elite members. The announcement echoed through the gate area like a starting gun. Marcus saved the document he'd been reviewing, a complex debt restructuring proposal that would either save or destroy a mid-sized trucking company in Ohio, and slid his phone into the front pocket of his hoodie. He stood slowly, feeling his lower back protest after hours of sitting, grabbed his messenger bag, and shuffled toward the gate. He was the third person in line behind a woman in a Chanel suit who was speaking rapid-fire French into a Bluetooth earpiece, and an elderly man with a Swiss passport who moved with the careful precision of someone who'd been flying first class since before Marcus was born. The gate agent, a tired-looking woman named Sarah Matthews, whose name tag was slightly crooked, barely looked up as she scanned Marcus's digital boarding pass. The device beeped green. Seat 1A, first class, full fare. Sarah's eyes flicked from her screen to Marcus's hoodie, then back to the screen. She frowned slightly, her finger hovering over her keyboard as if she expected the computer to suddenly announce that a mistake had been made. But the line was growing behind them, and her supervisor was watching from across the corridor. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Sterling," she said finally, though her voice carried the kind of doubt usually reserved for checking IDs at expensive nightclubs. "Thank you," Marcus replied, his voice rough from exhaustion and too much coffee. He walked down the jet bridge, feeling the familiar rush of cool, recycled air that meant he was almost home free. The narrow tunnel stretched ahead of him like a portal to 8 hours of blessed unconsciousness. Flight 492 was a Boeing 777-300ER, one of Skyline Airways' flagship aircraft, configured with 28 first-class seats that could convert into fully flat beds. The cabin was a study in understated luxury, with soft cream leather seats, polished walnut trim, and ambient lighting that seemed designed to make even the most stressed executive feel like they were floating on a cloud. Marcus stepped aboard and turned left past the galley, where flight attendants were busy with pre-flight preparations. The first-class cabin was mostly empty, just a handful of passengers settling into their seats and stowing carry-on bags in the oversized overhead bins. He found seat 1A, tossed his messenger bag into the compartment above, and collapsed into the wide plush seat that would be his sanctuary for the next 8 hours. He didn't wait for the pre-flight champagne service. He didn't browse the leather-bound menu or adjust the personal entertainment system. He simply reclined the seat, slightly pulled his hood down over his eyes like a makeshift sleep mask, and let himself drift into the kind of light doze that comes just before real sleep arrives. 5 minutes later, everything changed. "Excuse me, you're in my seat." The words cut through Marcus's semi-consciousness like an alarm clock. He peeled one eye open and found himself looking up at a man who appeared to have been designed in a laboratory specifically to embody every negative stereotype about corporate America. Tall, broad-shouldered, and aggressively confident, the man wore a navy Italian suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His hair was styled with the kind of precision that suggested a daily appointment with a high-end barber, and he held a crystal tumbler filled with what looked like top-shelf scotch that he must have acquired from the first-class lounge. This was Julian Thorne, though Marcus didn't know his name yet. What Marcus could see immediately was that Julian carried himself with the particular brand of arrogance that comes from never being told no by anyone who mattered. Behind Julian stood flight attendant Brenda Miller, a 20-year veteran of commercial aviation who wore her seniority like armor and her authority like a weapon. Marcus rubbed his face trying to shake off the fog of exhaustion. "I'm sorry. What I said, you're in my seat," Julian repeated, speaking slowly and clearly as if addressing a particularly slow child. "1A, the bulkhead. I always sit in 1A when I fly to London. It's my usual arrangement with Skyline Airways." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed the screen displaying his boarding pass. "Check your ticket, friend. I booked this seat 3 weeks ago." Julian let out a short, incredulous laugh that had absolutely no humor in it. He turned to Brenda as if Marcus had just told him the earth was flat. "Brenda, would you please tell this gentleman to collect his belongings and head back to coach where he belongs? I have a board meeting in London tomorrow morning and I need the space to prepare." Brenda stepped forward, her heels clicking against the cabin floor with military precision. She looked at Marcus with the kind of expression usually reserved for examining something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of a shoe. Her eyes took in his hoodie, his sweatpants, his tired face, and made the kind of instant judgment that had probably served her well in 20 years of commercial aviation, but was about to destroy her career in spectacular fashion. Sir Brenda said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Marcus sighed and unlocked his phone again, holding up the screen. It clearly displayed passenger Sterling Marcus. Seat 1A, flight 492, departure 8:15 p.m. Brenda stared at it for several long seconds, her frown deepening with each passing moment. "This must be some kind of operation error," she said finally. "It's not an error," Marcus replied, his patience already starting to fray around the edges. "I purchased this ticket at full fare. Now, if you don't mind, I'm trying to get some rest before we take off." He started to put his headphones back on, but Julian stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "Listen to me, pal," Julian said, leaning down so Marcus could smell the expensive scotch on his breath and see the gold caps on his back molars. "I don't know how you hacked the airline's app or whose credit card you used to buy this ticket, but we all know you don't belong in first class. People like me pay thousands of dollars for this experience specifically so we don't have to sit next to people like you." The first-class cabin had started to fill with other passengers, and several of them had stopped their pre-flight routines to watch the developing drama. A wealthy-looking couple in row 2 paused their conversation about their upcoming ski trip to Gstaad. A tech entrepreneur in seat 3A lowered his iPad and turned to get a better view. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from luxurious calm to uncomfortable tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Marcus looked up at Julian with an expression that gave absolutely nothing away. His voice when he spoke was quiet and controlled. "People like me." "You know exactly what I mean," Julian snapped. "Troublemakers, scam artists, people trying to game the upgrade game." He gestured dismissively at Marcus's appearance. "Look at yourself. You look like you're headed to community college, not crossing the Atlantic in the first class." Sir Brenda interrupted, placing what she probably thought was a calming hand on Julian's arm while keeping her laser focus on Marcus. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. I can resolve this quickly and professionally." She turned back to Marcus, dropping the customer service facade entirely like a mask falling to the floor. "Sir, I'm going to need you to gather your belongings. We have a lovely seat available in economy plus with extra legroom. Mr. Thorne is a Diamond Medallion member with Skyline Airways, and purely based on seniority and loyalty status, he has priority seating privileges for premium locations. That's not how airplane tickets work," Marcus said, his voice hardening slightly. "I paid for seat 1A. I'm sitting in seat 1A. It's really that simple. Actually, it's not that simple," Brenda replied, crossing her arms. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. The captain is currently busy with pre-flight checks, but I won't hesitate to call gate security to have you removed for non-compliance with crew instructions." non-compliance. Marcus let out a dry laugh that had no humor in it whatsoever. I'm sitting in the seat I legally purchased. The only person being non-compliant here is your diamond medallion friend who thinks his frequent flyer status trumps basic contract law. Julian slammed his free hand against the side of Marcus's seat pod, causing several other passengers to jump and turn around completely. Do you have any idea who I am? He demanded, his voice rising enough that people in business class could hear every word. I am Julian Thorne. I'm a senior managing director at Pemberton Capital. My firm manages institutional assets worth more than you could count in a lifetime. I am not spending 7 hours across the Atlantic staring at some guy in a hoodie who probably hasn't showered in a week. It was true that Marcus hadn't showered in 2 days, though he smelled of the expensive sandalwood soap from the Four Seasons, where he'd been staying during the Meridian negotiations, mixed with exhaustion and the faint residue of too much coffee. But Julian was building a narrative, and facts had never been particularly important to Julian when he was building narratives. Last warning, Brenda announced, her finger hovering over the intercom button like a gunslinger ready to draw. Either move to row 34C voluntarily, or I'm calling gate security to escort you off this aircraft. Marcus looked at Brenda. He looked at Julian, who was practically vibrating with righteous indignation. He looked around the cabin at the faces of the other first-class passengers, most of whom had already decided that he was the problem, simply because he didn't look like he belonged there. These were people who lived in a world where appearance equaled legitimacy, where expensive clothes meant worthiness, where the right watch or handbag served as a passport to respect. He realized that no matter what he said, no matter what documentation he provided, no matter how calm and reasonable he remained, they had already made their decision about who he was and what he deserved. They saw a young black man in casual clothes, and their minds had filled in the rest of the story with assumptions that were as old as they were ugly. Marcus took a deep breath and made a choice that would change dozens of lives forever. Call gate security, he said calmly. Call airport police. Call whoever you want. I'm not moving from the seat I paid for. Brenda's eyes narrowed into slits. Fine, have it your way. She turned on her heel and marched toward the cockpit to use the aircraft interphone, her steps sharp enough to mark time for a military parade. Julian remained standing over Marcus's seat, swaying slightly from the scotch, and what was clearly a lifetime of never being challenged by anyone who couldn't fire him. You're making a huge mistake, he said, pointing a manicured finger at Marcus's face. I know people at this airline, important people. When this is over, you'll be lucky if they don't ban you from flying altogether. I'm terrified, Marcus replied dryly, putting his headphones back on. But Julian wasn't finished. He was the kind of man who needed to have the last word, needed to establish dominance, needed everyone within earshot to understand exactly where they stood in his personal hierarchy. People like you always think you can game the operation, he said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. You probably found some glitch in their website, or used a stolen credit card, or figured out some way to scam an upgrade. But there are people like me who actually earn these seats, who contribute to the economy, who deserve to be treated with respect. From 3 rows back, Dr. Elena Vasquez, a cardiologist returning to London after a medical conference in Chicago, looked up from her journal with obvious disgust. She'd seen Julian in the first-class lounge earlier, where he'd spent 20 minutes loudly berating a bartender for not knowing how to make his cocktail exactly the way he preferred it. "Excuse me," she said clearly, "but this is completely inappropriate. That gentleman has done nothing wrong." Julian spun around to face her, whiskey sloshing in his glass. "I'm sorry, but this doesn't concern you. It concerns everyone on this aircraft," Dr. Vasquez replied firmly. "You're disrupting the entire cabin because you decided you don't like someone's clothes." "It's embarrassing. Stay out of this," Julian snapped, but other passengers were starting to murmur their agreement with Dr. Vasquez. Lisa Park, a software engineer in seat 2, B pulled out her phone and started recording. "This is exactly the kind of discrimination we need to document," she said to her traveling companion. "Corporate bullies think they can humiliate people just because they have money. Put that phone away." Brenda ordered sharply as she returned from the cockpit. "Recording is not permitted on this aircraft. Actually, recording is completely legal as long as I'm not interfering with crew operations," Lisa replied. "And discrimination is illegal regardless of altitude." Brenda ignored her and turned back to Marcus. "Gate security is on their way. Last chance to avoid a scene that's going to be very unpleasant for you." Marcus looked up at her with the kind of calm that comes from having survived much worse than angry flight attendants and entitled hedge fund managers. "The only scene happening here is the one you're creating. I bought a ticket. I'm sitting in my seat. Everything else is your choice." 2 minutes later, Gary Swanson, the gate manager, boarded the aircraft along with Officer Rick Martinez from Chicago Police Aviation Unit. Gary was a 28-year veteran of airport operations who'd seen every possible variation of passenger drama, but he looked distinctly uncomfortable as he approached Seat 1A. "Good evening," Sir Gary said to Marcus. "I understand there's some confusion about seating arrangements." "No confusion at all," Marcus replied politely. "I'm sitting in the seat I purchased." He showed Gary his phone with the boarding pass clearly displayed. Gary examined it carefully, then looked at Julian's boarding pass, which showed Seat 2A. "Mr. Thorne, your assigned seat is 2A, not 1A. Julian's face flushed red. "That's not the point. I always sit in 1A. It's my usual arrangement. This person clearly doesn't belong in first class at all." Officer Martinez, who'd been listening to the exchange with growing discomfort, stepped forward. "Sir, what exactly are you alleging?" "That this gentleman stole a seat, that he forged a boarding pass. I'm saying that someone dressed like that doesn't have the money to fly first class legitimately," Julian replied, apparently oblivious to how his words sounded to everyone else in the cabin. A heavy silence fell over the first-class section. Officer Martinez looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of passengers who were clearly disgusted by what they were witnessing. Dr. Vasquez was shaking her head in disbelief. Lisa Park was still recording. Even the wealthy couple in row 2 looked mortified. "Mr. Thorne," Officer Martinez said carefully, "I can't remove a passenger from an aircraft because you don't like their clothes. This gentleman has a valid ticket for this seat. Unless you're alleging an actual crime, there's nothing for law enforcement to address here." But Brenda wasn't finished. She'd built her entire identity around being the authority figure in the aircraft cabin, and backing down now would undermine everything she believed about her role and status. "Officer, I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. I have the authority to remove disruptive passengers, and I'm exercising that authority." "What exactly has he done that's disruptive?" Dr. Vasquez called out. "He's been sitting quietly this entire time. The only disruption is coming from the people trying to remove him. He's refused to follow crew instructions," Brenda replied. "What instructions?" Lisa Park asked, her phone still recording. "To give up the seat he paid for. That's not a crew instruction, that's discrimination." Marcus had remained quiet throughout this exchange, watching the drama unfold around him like a man observing a storm from inside a house. But now he spoke up, his voice calm and clear enough for everyone in the cabin to hear. "Officer Martinez," he said, "I'd like to file a formal complaint for harassment and discrimination. I've been threatened, intimidated, and publicly humiliated by airline staff, and this passenger for no reason other than their prejudicial assumptions about who I am and what I can afford." Julian laughed loudly. "Oh, this is rich. Now you're playing the victim card." "I'm not playing anything," Marcus replied. "I'm a paying customer being mistreated by your airline's employees and tolerated by your gate management. If this is how Skyline Airways treats its customers, then Skyline Airways has a very serious problem." Gary Swanson looked around the cabin, clearly recognizing that this situation had spiraled completely out of control. Half the first-class passengers were recording on their phones. Dr. Vasquez was threatening to file her own complaint, and Julian was becoming more belligerent with each passing minute. "Mr. Thorne," Gary said finally, "I need you to take your assigned seat in 2A so we can proceed with departure." "Absolutely not," Julian replied. "I'm not sitting next to him. Either he moves or I want a full refund and compensation." "Sir, 2A is a perfectly good seat," Gary replied. It's not about the seat Julian snapped, it's about the principle. People like him need to understand that there are standards, that there are consequences for trying to rise above their station. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Julian seemed to realize he'd gone too far, but it was too late to take them back. Dr. Vasquez stood up in her seat. Did everyone else hear that she asked loudly? He just said people need to know their station. In 2023, on an American airline. Lisa Park's phone captured every word. "This is going straight to social media," she announced. "People need to see exactly what kind of attitudes still exist." Officer Martinez had heard enough. "Mr. Thorne, you need to take your assigned seat or leave the aircraft. Your choice." But Julian wasn't ready to surrender. He was the kind of man who doubled down when challenged, who escalated when cornered, who would rather burn everything down than admit he was wrong. "This is ridiculous," he declared, pulling out his own phone. "I'm calling Richard Vance right now. He's the CEO of this airline and a personal friend. We'll see how long your jobs last after he hears about this." He scrolled through his contacts and placed the call, putting it on speaker for everyone to hear. After several rings, a tired voice answered. "Julian, it's after 9 p.m. This better be important." "Richard, I'm on Flight 492 to London, and your staff is allowing some vagrant to occupy first class. I need this resolved immediately." There was a pause. "Julian, what exactly are you talking about?" "There's a person in seat 1A who clearly doesn't belong there. He's dressed like a homeless person and he's making everyone uncomfortable. Your flight attendant needs to remove him, but she's being influenced by some bleeding heart passengers who are recording everything and making threats." Another pause, longer this time. "Julian, do you hear yourself right now? Are you seriously calling me to complain about another passenger's clothes? This isn't about clothes, Richard. This is about maintaining standards, about protecting the experience for legitimate customers. Julian, I'm going to hang up now before you say something that gets both of us in serious trouble. Take your assigned seat or get off my airplane." The line went dead. Julian stared at his phone in shock, clearly unable to process that his grand gesture had backfired so completely. Gary Swanson saw his opportunity. "Mr. Thorne, you have 30 seconds to take seat 2A, or you'll be removed from the aircraft." Julian looked around the cabin, seeing the faces of passengers who were no longer just uncomfortable, but actively hostile toward him. Dr. Vasquez was glaring at him with open contempt. Lisa Park was still recording. The wealthy couple in row 2 had turned their backs to him entirely. "This isn't over," he muttered, but he took his seat in 2A, slouching down like a sulking child. Marcus had watched this entire exchange with the same calm expression he'd maintained throughout the ordeal. He nodded politely to Officer Martinez and Gary Swanson as they prepared to leave the aircraft. "Thank you for your professionalism," he told them quietly. As the crew prepared for departure, Dr. Vasquez leaned across the aisle. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. It was completely inappropriate." "I appreciate that," Marcus replied, "but I've seen worse." He put his headphones back on and closed his eyes, but he wasn't sleeping. He was thinking, he was planning, and he was making a series of mental phone calls that would change everything. Because while Julian Thorne and Brenda Miller had been busy demonstrating their ignorance and prejudice, Marcus Sterling had been quietly calculating exactly how much it would cost to buy their employer. And the answer, as it turned out, was surprisingly affordable. Flight 492 pushed back from the gate at 8:23 p.m., 8 minutes behind schedule. As the Boeing 777 taxied toward the runway through Chicago's maze of taxiways, Marcus Sterling kept his eyes closed and his headphones on, but his mind was racing through calculations that had nothing to do with sleep. Sterling Dynamics maintained detailed financial profiles on over 3,000 companies across 16 different industries. Airlines were a particular area of expertise since transportation and logistics formed the backbone of his empire. And Skyline Airways Marcus knew from memory was in trouble. Deep trouble. The carrier had been hemorrhaging money for the past 18 months, caught between rising fuel costs, increased labor demands, and a series of public relations disasters that had damaged their premium brand. Their stock price had dropped 42% in the last year. Their debt-to-equity ratio was approaching dangerous territory. They'd been forced to defer aircraft deliveries, cancel routes to secondary cities, and offer early retirement packages to senior staff. Most importantly, their credit rating had been downgraded twice in the past 6 months, making it increasingly expensive for them to service their existing debt obligations. Marcus knew from his company's intelligence network that Skyline's board had been quietly exploring strategic options, including a potential merger or acquisition by a larger carrier. In other words, they were vulnerable. The airplane reached the runway threshold and paused as air traffic control cleared them for takeoff. The engines spooled up to full power, pressing Marcus back into his leather seat as Flight 492 accelerated down the runway and lifted into the Chicago night. Normally, takeoff was Marcus's favorite part of flying, the moment when the earth fell away and all the problems on the ground became temporarily irrelevant. Tonight was different. Tonight, Marcus was planning something that would either be brilliant or completely insane. He waited until the aircraft reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign chimed off before pulling out his phone. The Boeing 777 was equipped with high-speed satellite internet, which meant Marcus could access his company's secure servers from 37,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. His first call was to Sarah Chen, his chief of staff, who answered on the second ring despite it being nearly 10 p.m. Eastern Time. "Marcus, how's the flight?" "Eventful." Marcus replied, speaking quietly enough that Julian couldn't eavesdrop from seat 2A. "I need you to pull everything we have on Skyline Airways. Financial statements, debt structure, credit agreements, shareholder information, the works." Skyline Airways. Sarah sounded confused. "The airline you're flying on right now?" "That's the one. I also need you to contact David Kim in our credit markets division. Tell him I want real-time pricing on Skyline's senior debt tranches." And Sarah, "Yes, this is priority 1. Drop everything else. Marcus, can I ask what this is about?" Marcus looked across the aisle at Julian Thorne, who was aggressively typing on his laptop while occasionally shooting hostile glares in Marcus's direction. "Let's just say I'm exploring a new investment opportunity." While Sarah got to work, Marcus opened his tablet and began reviewing Skyline Airways' recent financial filings. As he'd suspected, the numbers were worse than they appeared on the surface. The airline was burning through cash at an unsustainable rate, had missed 2 consecutive quarterly earnings estimates, and was facing a series of debt maturities over the next 12 months that would require refinancing. More interesting was the ownership structure. Skyline Airways was publicly traded, but the shares were concentrated among a relatively small number of institutional investors. The largest shareholder was Meridian Pension Fund, which owned 12.3% of outstanding shares. The second largest was Blackstone Credit with 9.7%. Marcus smiled. He'd done business with both firms before. More importantly, he'd done favors for both firms before. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from David Kim. Skyline Senior Notes trading at 67 cents on the dollar. Heavy selling pressure from insurance companies reducing exposure. Could acquire controlling position for approximately $400 million cash. Marcus did the math quickly. $400 million would give Sterling Dynamics ownership of enough debt to effectively control Skyline Airways' financial destiny. If the airline couldn't service its obligations, the debt holders could force a restructuring, bankruptcy, or sale. And if Marcus owned the majority of that debt, he would be in the driver's seat for any of those scenarios. His second call was to Jennifer Walsh, Sterling Dynamics' chief financial officer, who was still in the office despite the late hour. "Jennifer, I need you to authorize a credit facility of $500 million. Immediate availability." $500 million. Jennifer's voice carried the kind of careful concern that comes from managing billions of dollars in assets. "What's the opportunity? Distressed airline debt, time-sensitive situation. Marcus, you're supposed to be sleeping on a plane to London. What airline debt could be so urgent that—" She stopped mid-sentence. "Oh my God, please tell me you're not about to buy the airline you're flying on." I'm not about to buy it, Marcus replied. I'm about to control it. There's a difference, Marcus. Jennifer, trust me on this. The math works. The opportunity is real. And the timing couldn't be better. He could hear her typing rapidly on her computer. Okay, I'm looking at Skyline's fundamentals. You're right that they're distressed, but their asset base is still substantial. Fleet value alone is probably close to $3 billion. Exactly. Even in a worst-case scenario, we recover our investment through asset liquidation. But I don't think it'll come to that. What's your play? Marcus glanced around the first-class cabin, making sure no one was listening to his conversation. Short-term, we use the debt position to force management changes. Long-term, we turn this into a profitable operation through proper leadership and strategic focus. And the timeline I want to move tonight. Start acquiring positions in London markets, continue in New York when markets open tomorrow. I want controlling debt position established within 48 hours. Marcus, that's incredibly aggressive. This kind of move requires board approval, due diligence, regulatory. Jennifer, I've been doing due diligence on this company for years. Their fundamentals are sound, their management is weak, and their debt is undervalued because of temporary market conditions. This is exactly the kind of opportunity we built Sterling Dynamics to capitalize on. There was a long pause while Jennifer considered the implications. If we move this fast and this aggressively, it's going to attract attention. Regulatory scrutiny, media coverage, competitor response. Good. Let them pay attention. Maybe they'll learn something. Marcus ended the call and immediately contacted his London office, where it was already 3:30 a.m., but his European trading desk operated around the clock. Within minutes, Sterling Dynamics traders were purchasing Skyline Airways debt from institutional sellers who were happy to liquidate their positions to a buyer willing to pay fair market value. By the time Flight 492 was halfway across the Atlantic, Marcus had acquired 47% of Skyline's outstanding senior debt and was negotiating for additional tranches with 3 different pension funds. Meanwhile, Julian Thorne had no idea that the man he'd tried to humiliate was in the process of becoming his airline's largest creditor. Julian was busy with his own phone calls, though his were considerably less productive than Marcus's. He'd spent the first hour of the flight leaving increasingly angry voicemails for various contacts at Skyline Airways demanding that someone important call him back to discuss the unacceptable treatment he'd received. He'd also been posting on social media, sharing his version of events with his 3,000 Twitter followers. His tweets painted him as the victim of reverse discrimination and political correctness run amok. He'd included no photos or videos, just his own narrative about how standards are declining in premium travel. What Julian didn't realize was that Lisa Park had posted her video footage to TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram simultaneously. Her video, which clearly showed Julian's increasingly erratic behavior and discriminatory comments, had already been viewed over 200,000 times and was trending with hashtags like airline discrimination and entitled delight. Dr. Elena Vasquez had also been busy on social media, but in a more constructive way. As a prominent physician with significant professional credibility, her tweets carrying the same hashtags but providing medical context about implicit bias and its psychological effects were being widely shared by healthcare professionals and social justice advocates. The story was going viral, but not in the way Julian had intended. Brenda Miller, the flight attendant, was also discovering that actions have consequences. A passenger in business class had recognized her from a previous flight where she'd been similarly hostile to a family with young children and had posted about the pattern of behavior they'd observed. That post was also gaining traction with current and former airline employees sharing their own stories about problematic crew members and discriminatory incidents they'd witnessed. None of this registered with Marcus, who was focused entirely on the financial maneuvering required to acquire control of a major airline in less than 8 hours. What he'd told Jennifer was true. He'd been studying Skyline Airways for years as part of Sterling Dynamics' comprehensive analysis of the transportation sector. But he'd never seriously considered acquiring them until Julian Thorne and Brenda Miller had demonstrated exactly what was wrong with the company's culture. Poor leadership Marcus had learned over 15 years of building his empire always filtered down through an organization. When senior management tolerated discriminatory behavior, it became embedded in the company's DNA. When executives prioritized the wrong metrics, like keeping entitled customers happy regardless of their behavior, it corrupted decision-making at every level. Skyline Airways had a beautiful fleet of aircraft, valuable route authorities, and thousands of dedicated employees. But it also had a management team that had allowed people like Brenda Miller to represent their brand, and Julian Thorne to believe he owned Seat 1A simply because he'd demanded it loudly enough. Marcus was about to fix that problem. His phone buzzed with another encrypted message from his London team Meridian Pension Fund ready to sell full position. Price, $310M for 12.3% equity stake plus $180M in convertible debt. Deal can close within 24 hours if terms acceptable. Marcus smiled. Meridian Pension Fund was facing regulatory pressure to reduce their exposure to volatile industries, and Skyline Airways definitely qualified as volatile. They'd been looking for an exit strategy for months, and Marcus was offering them exactly what they needed: a clean sale at fair value with no regulatory complications. He typed his response quickly: terms acceptable. Authorization code Sterling 7 Alpha. Execute immediately. With that single message, Marcus had just committed nearly $500 million to acquiring control of the airline whose staff had spent the evening trying to humiliate him. The irony wasn't lost on him, but Marcus wasn't finished. He'd learned long ago that winning wasn't just about making the right moves. It was about making those moves at the right time with maximum impact. And the timing for this particular lesson couldn't be more perfect. Julian Thorne was about to discover that actions have consequences. Brenda Miller was about to learn that customer service means treating all customers with respect. And Richard Vance, Skyline Airways CEO, was about to find out what happened when his airline's culture permitted discrimination against the wrong person. Marcus looked at his watch, 2:47 a.m. London time. In approximately 4 hours, Flight 492 would touch down at Heathrow Airport. By then, he would own controlling interest in the airline and would be in a position to implement changes immediately. He made one final call this time to James Morrison, Sterling Dynamics, head of corporate security and a former FBI investigator. James, I need complete background checks on 2 individuals. Brenda Miller, senior flight attendant for Skyline Airways employee number unknown, but working Flight 492 tonight. And Julian Thorne, managing director at Pemberton Capital. What kind of background checks? Everything. Financial history, employment records, legal issues, social media presence, any complaints or disciplinary actions. I want to know if tonight's behavior is part of a pattern. Timeline, 6 hours. Marcus, that's James. I'm about to spend $500 million partly based on the behavior I witnessed from these 2 individuals tonight. I want to make sure I understand exactly who they are and what they represent. Understood. You'll have full reports before you land. Marcus hung up and finally allowed himself to recline his seat. He closed his eyes, but his mind continued working through the implications of what he'd just set in motion. In less than 12 hours, he would transform from victim to owner. Julian Thorne would discover that his usual arrangement with Skyline Airways no longer mattered. Brenda Miller would learn that customer service extended to all customers regardless of appearance. And Richard Vance would face the consequences of running an airline that tolerated discrimination. But most importantly, thousands of other passengers who looked like Marcus Sterling would fly on Skyline Airways in the future without facing the humiliation he'd experienced tonight. That more than any financial return made this investment worthwhile. At 11:47 p.m. Chicago time, while Flight 492 cruised at 39,000 feet somewhere over Greenland, the story of Julian Thorne's airline meltdown reached a tipping point that transformed it from social media buzz to global news. It started with Lisa Park's original video, which had been viewed over 500,000 times across various platforms. But the moment that changed everything came when Dr. Elena Vasquez's 14-year-old daughter Maria shared the video on her TikTok account with a caption that went straight to the heart of the matter. "This is why I'm scared to fly alone. Because there are adults who will attack you just for existing in a space they think you don't deserve." Maria Vasquez had 47,000 followers, mostly teenagers and young adults, who followed her for her advocacy work around youth mental health and social justice. Her video, which combined Lisa Park's footage with her own commentary about discrimination and implicit bias, exploded across teenage social media with a force that surprised everyone. Within 2 hours, the video had been shared over 50,000 times and had attracted the attention of influencers with much larger platforms. Brittany Chen, a lifestyle blogger with 2.3 million followers, reposted it with her own story about being questioned about her first-class ticket because gate agents assumed she was too young to afford it. Marcus Williams, a viral comedian with 1.8 million followers, created a response video that used humor to highlight the absurdity of Julian's behavior. But the moment that really changed everything came when Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez retweeted Dr. Vasquez's original post with a comment that read, "This is exactly why we need stronger enforcement of civil rights protections in commercial aviation." Discrimination doesn't disappear at 30,000 feet. AOC's retweet, which went out to her 13.2 million followers, transformed what had been a viral social media story into a national conversation about discrimination in air travel. Within minutes, other politicians were weighing in. Senator Elizabeth Warren called for Department of Transportation investigations into airline discrimination policies. Representative Ilhan Omar shared her own experiences with discriminatory treatment while traveling. Conservative politicians pushed back with Senator Ted Cruz tweeting that political correctness is destroying customer service, and Representative Matt Gaetz claiming that airlines should be allowed to maintain standards for their premium customers. The political divide made the story even more viral as people on both sides shared the video to support their arguments. Cable news programs picked up the story for their late-night broadcasts. International media outlets began covering it as a window into American attitudes about race and class. And through it all, Julian Thorne remained blissfully unaware that he'd become the most hated man on the internet. Marcus Sterling was also unaware of his newfound internet fame, but for different reasons. He'd been busy orchestrating the most expensive acquisition in Sterling Dynamics' 15-year history, and the logistical complexity of buying an airline while flying on that same airline had consumed all of his attention. By midnight, Central Time, Sterling Dynamics had acquired 63% of Skyline Airways' outstanding debt and 27% of its equity. Marcus now controlled enough of the company's capital structure to effectively dictate its strategic direction. More importantly, he had the legal authority to demand immediate changes in management and operational policies. His phone buzzed with a call from Jennifer Walsh, who was monitoring the situation from Sterling Dynamics Crisis Management Center in Manhattan. "Marcus, we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The video problem. The discrimination story is going viral in a major way. CNN just ran a segment about it. Fox News is covering it. It's trending worldwide on Twitter." Marcus frowned. He'd been so focused on the financial aspects of his acquisition that he hadn't been monitoring social media. "What video?" "Multiple passengers recorded the incident with you and Julian Thorne." "It's everywhere." "And Marcus?" "Yeah, you look really good in it. Calm, dignified, reasonable. Thorne looks like an entitled maniac. But that's not the problem. What's the problem?" "The problem is that you're about to own an airline that's being destroyed in the court of public opinion. Skyline stock is down another 12% in after-hours trading. Their customer service phones are jammed with people canceling reservations. Someone started a boycott hashtag that's trending in 17 countries. Marcus absorbed this information while calculating the implications. A viral discrimination scandal could actually accelerate his timeline for implementing changes at Skyline Airways. The worse the company's reputation became, the more pressure there would be for immediate action from new ownership. Jennifer, I want you to prepare a statement for release as soon as we land in London. Sterling Dynamics is acquiring Skyline Airways specifically to address the cultural problems highlighted by tonight's incident. We're committed to ensuring that every passenger receives respectful treatment, regardless of their appearance, background, or personal circumstances. Marcus, are you sure you want to go public with this so quickly? Usually, we keep acquisitions quiet until they're completely finalized. This isn't a usual situation. Besides, the acquisition is moving faster than normal because of the viral story. Institutional investors are panicking and selling at discount prices. We're getting better terms because of the social media backlash. It was true. The same viral video that was destroying Skyline's reputation was making it cheaper for Marcus to acquire the company. Pension funds and insurance companies were dumping their Skyline holdings to avoid being associated with the discrimination scandal, which allowed Sterling Dynamics to acquire those positions at steep discounts to fair value. Marcus's phone rang again, this time with a call from James Morrison with the background check results he'd requested. Marcus, you're going to want to hear this. Julian Thorne has a history. What kind of history? 3 formal complaints filed against Pemberton Capital for discriminatory behavior in client interactions. 2 settlements paid to former employees who alleged workplace harassment. A restraining order filed by an ex-girlfriend who claimed he became violent when she tried to break up with him. And here's the interesting part. He's been suspended twice by Skyline Airways for disruptive behavior, but the suspensions were overturned after Pemberton Capital threatened to move their corporate travel account. Marcus felt a cold anger settle in his chest. So, this wasn't an isolated incident, not even close. And Brenda Miller isn't much better. She's had 17 customer complaints filed against her in the past 2 years, mostly for discriminatory treatment of passengers she deemed inappropriate for first class. The complaints were all dismissed by management because she has seniority and union protection. James, I want you to prepare detailed files on both individuals. Include everything: complaints, settlements, social media posts, financial information, anything that demonstrates a pattern of behavior. Already working on it. But Marcus, there's something else you should know. But the story isn't just viral anymore. It's national news, and you're being portrayed as the hero of the story. Dignified passenger maintains composure despite outrageous discrimination. There are calls for congressional hearings on airline discrimination. The NAACP issued a statement supporting you. Even some Republican politicians are saying Thorne's behavior was unacceptable. Marcus looked around the first-class cabin where most passengers were sleeping peacefully. Julian Thorne was snoring softly in seat 2. Completely oblivious to the fact that his life was imploding on social media. Brenda Miller was working in the galley, preparing breakfast service for the dawn arrival in London. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. Marcus's acquisition of Skyline Airways was proceeding exactly as planned, but the viral nature of the story meant that his first actions as the company's new owner would be under intense public scrutiny. That was fine with Marcus. He'd built his career on making bold moves under pressure, and this situation was no different. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Chen. London office reports acquisition complete. Sterling Dynamics now owns controlling position in Skyline Airways. Board meeting scheduled for 8 a.m. London time. Richard Vance requesting emergency call. Marcus smiled. Richard Vance, Skyline's CEO, was probably just realizing that his late-night conversation with Julian Thorne had been recorded and posted online. In that call, Vance had told Julian to take your assigned seat or get off my airplane, which had actually been the right thing to say. But Vance had also failed to address the underlying discrimination that created the situation in the first place. That failure was about to cost him his job. Marcus composed a response to Sarah: no emergency call with Vance. He can wait until the board meeting like everyone else. But I want legal counsel present and a complete recording of all proceedings. The cabin lights dimmed as the flight crew prepared for the final approach to London. Outside the windows, the first hints of dawn were appearing on the horizon, painting the Atlantic Ocean in shades of gold and pink. In less than 2 hours, Flight 492 would touch down at Heathrow Airport, and Marcus Sterling would walk off the plane as the owner of the airline that had tried to humiliate him. But first he had one more call to make. David Kim, it's Marcus. Status update on the acquisition, complete success. We now control 71% of Skyline's debt and 33% of equity. Combined position gives us absolute control over company operations and strategic direction. Financial impact, total investment of $473 million. Based on asset values and route authorities, we're looking at a minimum return of 30%, even in a liquidation scenario. But if we can turn operations around, the upside is significantly higher. Timeline for operational control. Legally, we can assume control immediately upon landing. British aviation authorities have been notified of the ownership change. FAA approval is pending but considered routine given our financial qualifications. Marcus ended the call and looked across the aisle at Julian Thorne, who was still sleeping peacefully. In approximately 90 minutes, Julian would wake up to discover that his little power play had cost him more than just social media humiliation. It had cost him his preferred airline, his corporate travel privileges, and quite possibly his career. The viral video had revealed something important. Julian Thorne represented everything wrong with modern corporate culture, and companies were starting to realize that associating with people like him carried serious reputational risks. Marcus had already instructed his team to prepare a comprehensive report on Julian's behavior and its impact on Sterling Dynamics' potential business relationships with Pemberton Capital. That report would be shared with other companies in Pemberton's investment network, making it clear that Julian Thorne was a liability who damaged any organization he represented. In the modern era of social media accountability, people like Julian couldn't hide behind corporate titles and expensive suits anymore. Their behavior had consequences. Brenda Miller was also about to discover those consequences. Her 17 customer complaints hadn't been dismissed because she was a good employee. They'd been dismissed because Skyline's management prioritized labor peace over customer satisfaction. That calculus was about to change dramatically under Marcus's ownership. Sterling Dynamics had built its reputation on operational excellence and customer service. Companies in the Sterling portfolio were known for treating all stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, communities, with respect and professionalism. Employees who couldn't meet those standards didn't remain Sterling employees for very long. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into London Heathrow. Local time is 6:15. AM temperature is 4 degrees Celsius and skies are partly cloudy. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. Marcus looked out the window as the English countryside came into view below. Somewhere down there, Richard Vance was probably having the worst morning of his professional life, fielding calls from board members, lawyers, and crisis management consultants as they tried to figure out how to respond to the viral discrimination story. What they didn't know yet was that their response didn't matter anymore. The decision had already been made by the company's new owner, and that decision was simple. Everyone who had participated in or enabled the discrimination against Marcus Sterling would be held accountable for their actions. Justice Marcus had learned over his 15 years in business wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. It was about ensuring that people who abused their power faced appropriate penalties so that other people in similar positions would think twice before making similar choices. Julian Thorne was about to face consequences. Brenda Miller was about to face consequences. Richard Vance was about to face consequences. And millions of people who would fly on Skyline Airways in the future would benefit from the changes that those consequences would create. Flight 492 touched down at Heathrow Airport at 6:47 a.m., London time 18 minutes ahead of schedule. As the Boeing 777 taxied toward the gate, Marcus powered on his phone and watched as dozens of notifications flooded his screen. Text messages from friends who'd seen the viral video. Emails from business partners expressing support. News alerts showing that the story was now being covered by major international media outlets. and one particularly interesting message from Oprah Winfrey's production company, asking if he'd be interested in discussing his experience on a show about dignity in the face of discrimination. Marcus smiled. He'd started this flight as a tired businessman trying to get some sleep. He was ending it as the owner of a major airline and an accidental civil rights symbol. It wasn't exactly how he'd planned to spend his evening, but it would certainly make for an interesting story to tell his children someday. As the aircraft came to a stop at the gate, Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to walk off the plane and into his new role as chairman and CEO of Skyline Airways. Julian Thorne and Brenda Miller had no idea what was coming next, but they were about to find out. The gate agent at Heathrow Airport, who greeted Flight 492's passengers that Thursday morning, was named Emma Thompson. Not the famous actress, but a 26-year-old Birmingham native who'd been working for Skyline Airways for 3 years, and took genuine pride in making every passenger feel welcome. Emma had arrived at work that morning to discover that her company was trending on social media for all the wrong reasons. Her supervisor had briefed her on the situation developing from Flight 492, warning her to be especially professional with all passengers and to immediately report any unusual requests or demands. What Emma didn't know was that she was about to meet the man who had just bought her employer. Marcus Sterling was the third passenger off the plane, walking calmly down the jet bridge with the same unhurried pace he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. He looked exactly like he had when he'd boarded in Chicago. Tired man in a gray hoodie carrying a worn leather bag, but Emma noticed something different in his eyes. There was a quiet intensity there, the kind of focus that comes from someone who has just made a decision that will change everything. Behind, Marcus Julian Thorne stumbled off the plane, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. His expensive suit was wrinkled from sleeping in his seat, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he was squinting against the terminal's bright fluorescent lights while aggressively checking his phone. Julian had woken up during the landing approach to discover that his phone had exploded with notifications. Hundreds of missed calls, thousands of text messages, and a voicemail box so full it wouldn't accept new messages. His first instinct had been to assume that something wonderful had happened. Maybe a major deal had closed, or he'd been promoted, or someone important wanted to offer him an opportunity. That optimism had lasted exactly 37 seconds, which was how long it took him to open Twitter and see that he was trending worldwide under hashtags like Entitled Elite and Airline Discrimination. Julian's hands shook as he scrolled through video after video of his behavior on Flight 492. Lisa Park's original recording had been viewed 3.2 million times. Maria Vasquez's commentary had hit 1.8 million views. Someone had even created a remix of his People Like You comment that was being shared as a TikTok meme. The worst part was the responses from people who recognized him. Former colleagues at Pemberton Capital were distancing themselves publicly. Clients were posting about their negative experiences with Julian. His ex-girlfriend had shared her own story about his aggressive behavior, complete with screenshots of threatening text messages he'd sent after their breakup. Julian's career reputation and personal life were imploding in real time, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. Marcus, meanwhile, was focused on more pressing matters. As he walked through the terminal towards passport control, he was receiving constant updates from his team about the acquisition's final details. Sarah Chen had sent him a detailed briefing. Skyline Airways board meeting moved to 7 a.m. to address the crisis. Richard Vance is calling it an emergency session to discuss reputational damage control. Legal team confirms we have full authority to attend as majority stakeholder and can call for immediate management changes. Jennifer Walsh had provided financial update, stock price down 31% in London pre-market trading. Credit rating agencies threatening additional downgrades. 3 major corporate clients have suspended their travel contracts pending investigation of discrimination policies. James Morrison had delivered intelligence about internal company responses. Skyline management in full panic mode. HR department received over 400 employee complaints overnight about discriminatory policies and hostile work environment. Union representatives demanding emergency meetings about Brenda Miller and other problematic staff members. Marcus smiled as he approached the passport control queue. Everything was proceeding exactly as he'd hoped. The viral nature of the discrimination story was creating massive pressure for immediate change at Skyline Airways, which gave him the perfect justification for the rapid management overhaul he was planning. But first he had one phone call to make. Marcus dialed Richard Vance's direct number while waiting in line to clear customs. The call was answered on the first ring by a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone who hadn't slept in 12 hours. "Sterling, how did you get this number?" "Richard, this is Marcus Sterling. I think we need to talk. Look, if this is about what happened on Flight 492, I want you to know that we're taking the situation very seriously. We've launched a full investigation and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken if any policies were violated." Marcus chuckled softly. "Richard, I'm not calling to complain about customer service. Then what? Why are you calling me at 7 in the morning? I'm calling to inform you of a change in ownership. As of 43 minutes ago, Sterling Dynamics became the majority controlling stakeholder of Skyline Airways through emergency debt acquisition." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Marcus could hear muffled voices in the background. Probably lawyers and crisis management consultants who were trying to help Richard navigate the viral discrimination story. That's impossible," Richard said finally. "Corporate acquisitions don't happen overnight. There are regulatory requirements, board approvals, due diligence processes. Richard, I've been tracking Skyline's financial position for over 2 years. Your debt-to-equity ratio has been deteriorating steadily. Your credit rating has been downgraded twice, and your institutional shareholders have been looking for exit strategies. Last night's discrimination incident simply provided the market catalyst that made acquisition feasible at reasonable valuations." More silence. Marcus could hear someone in the background saying, "Are you kidding me? The guy from the video bought us specifically. Marcus continued. Sterling Dynamics now owns 71% of your senior debt